Hello, this is Jack Tutor here from Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Colin Stetson, a saxophonist, composer, film score composer for films such as The Menu, Hereditary, the recent Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Colin has released an array of wonderful records. He's a really compelling live performer. You have that gigantic bass saxophone that he uses, mic'd up in these ways, which enable him to place emphasis in really curious places. Tiny sounds, like the clicking of the buttons and the mechanics of the saxophone, are given the forefront. Everything has this skewed sense of depth and scale. There's almost like a hyper-real quality to Colin's stuff, where there's almost too much body and too much presence, to the point where it doesn't sound real anymore. It's so interesting. Colin's new album, Chimera 1, is out now on Room 40 and takes this to a new level. I mean, it's seen, as I understand, by Colin as a new thread to his work, where you've got these 2 20-minute drone pieces which really blur the edges of the body. Apparently it took a lot of physical endurance to generate these pieces, but the end result kind of eschews these images of body and human origination. And they're so vast as well. If you listen on headphones, they're absolutely massive, these pieces. I had a great chat with Colin. He picked 4 records, not 3. Hey, that's fine by me. And I loved hearing him talk about all of them. You could really feel Colin's excitement for this music coming through, and it totally spilled over onto me as well. If you're enjoying the podcast, firstly, thank you. You can head over to ko-fi.com/crucial listening. You can donate one-off or monthly to help support the outgoings with keeping the podcast going and the energy expended in making it. And Colin's new album, Chimera 1, like I say, is out on Room 40. I'll pop links in the show notes to that too. Thank you for listening as always. Hope you enjoy this one. This is Colin Stetson on Crucial Listening. Hello, Colin. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So you're here to talk about your important albums, 4 of them. Before we get stuck into those, I want to ask about your new album, Chimera 1, which recently came out on Room 40. So with so much of your music, I'm immediately wanting to know how you went about recording it. I think on this one, even more so, because it generates such a kind of hyper-real space that you're in. So it would be really fascinating to hear you talk a little bit about how that actually went down in the room. So yeah, tell me about your memories of recording this one, how everything went down.
So Chimera, I actually recorded these 2 tracks. I think the recordings were done sometime in the first few months of 2020 COVID pandemic months. So it was, I believe, sometime around the June, May-June sort of window. Right when everything started in March of that year, I had just started work on a new scoring job, and so that kind of took me through a 2 or 3 month window of getting all of that. Of just being completely absorbed into that world. And then shortly thereafter, I found myself with something that I never really have found myself with, and that's a chunk of time where there was nothing booked and nothing need be done, and so it was like a perfect opportunity to get to something that I had been thinking about in concept for years, but never really had an opportunity to take the time to really just kind of implement it and to see what it would be like. And so, that being that, taking the miking approach that I do to my solo music and applying that to multiple takes. So in this instance, there's Orthrus and Cerberus, the two sides of this album. Orthrus being a duet of sorts between two baxes, and so that's a contrabass saxophone, and so that's me playing two 21-minute single takes on that instrument in succession, and then the other being Cerberus, that was two single takes of the bass saxophone along with one of the contrabass clarinet. And wow. so the idea being that being able to texturally capture each take with as much detail and as much perspective as was possible, the same way that I normally would do on any solo recording. And so there's the microphones that I use clearly on my throat. There are multiple microphones all situated both on the instrument and around the instrument, around my face and nose and mouth, picking up breath in the room. And so that just gives an enormous amount of texture, color, timbre, perspective, different perspectives in space. The idea being that then I can redesign more or less a surrealistic stereo space out of all of those images when I'm mixing the record, and so it can create so it is identical. The music is identical to the take that what happened in the room. I don't add anything, I don't change anything in terms of that, but the spatial experience can be specific. Can be unique and specific to the medium of the recording rather than the medium of medium of live performance, for example. And so that was the same principle with the solo music, and so this became the first iteration of this. And so there will be other volumes in the Chimera series. This is simply the first one, and I felt it pretty apt to do that in this very heavy, minimalistic / maximalist drone space.
So just to recap, so you did for each of these pieces, you went through, did a complete take of 20 minutes, and you went back, did another take with a separate instrument, did the whole thing again. Were you responding to the initial take when you were doing like this, the subsequent takes?
Well, what people don't hear are all of everything that got me to this point in terms of the composition. So I had already done a great many takes and practice, and rehearsing to well, not only to get it to the point where I was 20, that the 21 mark was comfortable and I felt vibrant, and strong, but also to figure so that I had a clear concept of the form, because this wasn't just going to be an improvised with one and then a reaction to it with the other. I didn't feel like I wanted that that kind of one-sided improvisation, and so no, there was quite a lot of organization that happened beforehand, and so when I played the first take, I knew what the form was going to be, and then the second take, a combination of reactivity, because there certainly is that in real time, as you're listening to the first, the breath of the first, the specific rhythms of the first, that's one thing, but also because I can look at waveforms while I'm recording, and I can not only react to things sonically, understand what I had laid out formally in the first one, and what formally this one was going to be doing in conjunction. Then I could also visually react as well to the waveform. So that's kind of how that process went.
Interesting you talk about the endurance aspect of it, these pieces being like 20 minutes long, because I think also listening to them, they have the sense from the listener's side of being not bodiless, that's certainly not true, but obviously dispersed across space, which I think in a manner that almost detracts awareness of the fact that there is someone using their breath to make this entire thing propel forward. So in what ways were these pieces a demand on your physicality? I mean, was it literally just the duration, or were there other ways in which you're approaching this material that applied itself upon your body in a different way to your previous stuff?
That's the duration. Well, first I'd say I very much appreciate that point. And if there's anything that I am going for with all of this music, it's really to have the experience of it transcend the physicality, to imbue the performance with some amount of the vitality and the extremity and the that feeling of knife's edge at points that comes from states of extremis and states of physical extremis, but for that not to be the conscious takeaway from a listener's standpoint. So, but yeah, for as far as my experience goes, that these ones, yes, it's the endurance aspect of it, but you can go forever. It just depends on what you're doing. So like if you're holding a kind of a note, if I was just holding a note in kind of a mezzo forte sort of, just kind of a medium volume, you could go, I don't want to say indefinitely, but you can go for, it could just go, because what it takes for your body to perpetuate that is not much. And so, mine at this point is not much. That said, the things that are the most difficult with something like this is the fact that much of the music, especially the latter half, say something like Orthrus, much of that take is, if not entirely at full volume, completely maxed out at full. I mean, it is. There's much of that where I am playing about as loud as I'll ever play. It's filling up the horn with as much air as I can, which means that my breaths are kind of a clip where it's really just like, because you're filling, exhausting kind of continuously. And so that, to keep that, that's the endurant part that is the most draining, because if you're really just kind of keeping it to that minimum where you're not playing so quietly that you have to let air out because your lungs are exhausting the oxygen, and you have to then cycle new air in. There's a kind of sweet spot where you're just kind of doing it right in the middle, where you can just kind of take lung fills whenever it is that you need them, and the amount of strain on the muscles of your face or chest or arms is very minimal. This is the opposite of that, where it was really just, you're just a bellows pumping and trying to keep the coals hot, as it were, for the whole of it. So yeah, and I find it. I mean, it was, like I said, it took I think probably a couple of weeks to get myself up to the point where I thought I was doing it the way I wanted to do it, and then when I'm actually performing something like this, it's quite intoxicating because of the way that just the immediacy of that, how much it an action like that demands that you be completely in its thrall. You can't think about anything else.
Do you have plans? I know you've got some tour dates in the spring. Is there going to be a variation on this material in amongst what you're playing? I don't know if you know yet, or if you can divulge.
Not in the spring. There are plans to bring this. Although, yeah, I have thought up a way to bring this to a stage that I think would be novel and kind of respectful to the music and reflective of what it's like the essence of it. Keeping true to that, and not just simply doing it as a duet with someone else or something, or doing it as a solo rendition of it. So, yeah, there's a way that I'm figuring out to present it, and so we'll see. It won't. Next year is quite hairy already, and so we'll see when we start to see shows of this, but relatively soon.
Okay, awesome. In the meantime, people should go check out Chimera 1. It's amazing. Headphone listen, it's stunning. Like, the breadth of it is fucking astounding. So cool. So
thank you, Jack.
Yeah. Recommend people dive into that. I'll put a link in the show notes as always. Colin, we should go to your important records now. So I know you've done a few of these things before. I'm intrigued on this occasion. Obviously, the prompt here is important records. How did you think about the word important when picking your list?
Yeah, I wanted to... It's a tough one because depending on the day one's asked, I think
yeah,
that... and also there are, when you ask for three, I kind of did four. Just, I don't know why. It was just because I couldn't decide in that particular moment. But given enough time, that list can just go on and on and on, because there are all of these things. I mean, I could have just easily said Ivo Popasov and his orchestra, Balkanology. That's a record that's just has had an enormous importance to me. Something like The Day, the Night, the Dawn, the Dusk by Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. Another one. I mean, but that list, just to say that can go on and on and on and on. These particular ones I picked for kind of I wanted to try to grab a few things from a few different, like maybe disparate areas of listening, although it certainly doesn't cover much ground, but it covers a bit. And so Band of Gypsies, Hendrix would be important in that it is my first music. It's this music that I grew up on. It's the first thing I can remember hearing when I was a kid. It was what was on in the house all the time. Is what I listened to with my dad, and easily the most influential. His playing and just example musically is easily the most influential of any on me from that early age and continually. And so something like Low Life, Bill Laswell and Peter Brotzman, that one somewhere along the same lengths in that early formative, hugely influential, more of an inspiration, opening of eyes in terms of what was possible. Also the first instance of, and really still like the main instance of bass saxophone being used in such a way as to completely obsess me to the acquisition of one eventually in the world. So yeah, that led me on that album led me on a direct path towards getting the instrument that has been so important to me and to my career and to just my sound as a musician. And Enya's Shepherd Moons. I mean, there could go on for many Enya records, but I think that if I was I tried to break it down to one that had maybe a little bit more of a concentration of the kinds of things that I've always been drawn to most poignantly in her work. And it's that one because of a few different instances there. I would say probably maybe crystallized most clearly on a song like Aphroventus, which is, I guess, the penultimate track on that record. She utilizes breath in such a way in her recording, and it's severalfold. Like the way that she utilizes breath, this kind of ubiquity of breath, air, and shimmer, I have found not only to be deeply affecting, but also hugely inspiring in terms of how I use that, using that in certain ways, be it in my own music or in my scoring of film and TV. And I use certain aspects of that almost always, and also the way that she creatively layers unisons in counterpoint to these very maximal proportions to create certain textures and certain presences. That's another thing that I've been very aware of and inspired by. And then Sam Cooke, anyway, the enormous breadth of all of his music. He has been one of the most oft listens for me for decades, in terms of just how the sheer glut of his output that I listen to on a regular basis. And I would say that this recording, more so than any of them, really, I feel like, is a snapshot, just the reality of what a performer he was, what a talent he was. And it's a live performance captured at a small club in Florida, and I feel like it's all the things that his like recordings from the Copa never were, like that being so controlled, and he was so much trying to be something else, maybe trying to accomplish something that steered him away from just the joy and just really passionate immediacy of the performance that's captured on this thing. It's not a perfect performance. It is, I mean, in terms of like, it's perfectly real. It's perfectly impassioned. It's some of the most like honest and I feel like romantic and just like joyous music making, and it's I've listened to it hundreds of times and never grow tired of that. So yeah, 4 records that are very important in various ways, but I guess with all with certain similarities.
So I wonder if we could dive in, maybe to begin with, just a bit more into Band of Gypsies. Mm-hmm. So I remember you saying actually in an interview that you didn't have loads of records at home, but Hendrix was in there somewhere. I mean, was this something that you connected with immediately as a kid? Was it a grower or?
Absolutely. It was one of the things that I loved. It was, I never had that moment where I ever thought like, what is this? Oh, you're listening to that again. This is dad music. It was quite the contrary. I was a classic rock kid and, adored, Hendrix and the Beatles and, Jethro Tull and, later on, Led Zeppelin and Queen, and would get, and then of course that led to my early teenage obsession with metal, and which is bled into my late 40s obsession with metal, and and yeah, so it definitely wasn't was always something that was present and was appreciated.
You mentioned that Hendrix is particularly influential to you. I wonder if you could unpack for me maybe some of the aspects of Hendrix that have really made an enduring impression on you.
He's the most expressive player of his instrument. I would posit for all time, the one who made it so identical to his humanity. I remember watching. I remember there was an early documentary that was made. I think the doc was made in the mid '70s. The interviews were from back then, and they had, so it was interspersed with a lot of really interesting and sometimes hilariously fun interviews with people who had been his contemporaries. But there was also a load of live performance footage, of course. And one of the things I remember just being completely entranced by was watching, the cameraman on certain shows would just focus the shot just on his head and shoulders, and so you'd just be seeing his face, you'd be hearing what he was doing, and so he'd be soloing, you'd be seeing his face. You're not looking at the guitar, you're not looking at his fingers, and just the way that his body, head and face moved in conjunction with the sound that was being produced. I just remember feeling it and thinking to myself, like, this is a person who there's no thought in translation. There's no, what do I want to say, how I'm going to say it, here it is. It's just, this was a man who spoke a language that he invented clearly and without any amount of translation. It was just there was an immediacy to it and an honesty to it, and just the fact of how, I don't even know how to describe that clarity of voice, but it was the most inspiring thing to me, and it continues to be. Like, I get genuinely worked up just thinking about. I mean, those images are burned in my brain, and the sounds are burned into my brain to such a degree that it was just like, if there is something to strive for, then it is that. Being so true to your vision and supporting it in such a way so as to nurture it, to manifest itself in as clearly as one can, and so that's he's the big one.
Beautiful. One other question on this one was about why this particular record. I mean, maybe this was the one in the home, but I presume kind of since initially discovering him, you've kind of gone in all directions with Hendrix and the experience, etc. So is there a reason that this one protrudes as the one that you end up picking?
I think this recording of Machine Gun specifically was something that I spent, I think maybe more than anything else that he did, might be the thing that I've listened to the most, because I just sat with it deeply, playing along to it, trying to mimic, and so I think I picked this one because they're just not to disregard the rest of the record, but this recording of Machine Gun was something that I have spent just countless hours with, and so that's why it was the one that I brought up.
You're in good company actually as well. Dylan Carlson from Earth picked that record as well on this podcast, so it's come up before.
Yeah, I imagine I'm not the only one.
Yeah, I found another one. talk a bit more about this Bill Laswell and Peter Brotzman one then, Low Life. So, can you remember how you first heard this one?
I'm trying to remember how. Because usually I remember exactly who brought me to something. I think this is what happened. And that I think that I found my way to this at the CD rack at the local tower or something like that, or no, maybe it was at the used spot, because I think I might have gotten this one used. But so when I was, 14, 15, I got into Mr. Bungle, because of listening to Slayer and Megadeth and all this metal. Someone tipped me off to Mr. Bungle, and so I became immediately enthralled by them, and that first record, which had a lot of sax on it, and Zorn was in there as a producer and on horn, and so that brought me to John Zorn early on. And so then I remember just being blown away by then the discovery of his whole body of music. And there were the solo records, there were, of course, Naked City and all of that, and then one of the more and then I forget which album it was there that brought me to Frith specifically, but when I started listening to Fred Frith and Gravity, so this is all something that kind of like happened in quick succession. You get into one, you start listening to all of it, then you go Who, and you listen to that, start listening to all of it. And so I was obsessed with and still am hugely obsessed with the record Gravity by Fred Frith, and there was a record that he did a duo record with John Zorn, and I believe it was that Frith Zorn record, although it could have been a Tim Byrne, Bill Frisell duo, which is also gorgeous, but one of these guitar sax duo records brought me kind of like right from, I don't know if it was somebody at the record store being like, well, if you liked this one, then
right, yeah.
But it was a direct link to being in a store, looking at this thing and going, oh, I'm going to probably, this sounds like it's right where I'm at right now, and then just becoming completely obsessed, because at that time, and still now, I don't know anything else that sounds like what they made with that record.
Right. Yeah.
And so it was and is just this hugely unique offering in music and in the world, and so I became completely enamored of it then, and still am now. I was listening to it again, and when I in preparation for talking to you, I listened to it again. I haven't listened to it for a bit of time. And it's it stands up in every way, and if anything, just gets better. And so, yeah, I mean, since then I've gotten to, Bill and I have played together several times in duo, and which has been one of the most thrilling opportunities in life, is to be able to play with him and explore these kind of spaces. I mean, and certainly not doing anything specifically like Low Life, but getting to play with somebody who was, whenever I get to do something like that, where I play with a performer who has been so completely responsible for forming so much of my musical DNA, it's a pretty amazing gift. So. Yeah.
Awesome. And you mentioned as well, this record led you on the path to acquiring the same instrument as Brotzman, the bass sax. Yeah. So I read you mentioning as well the fact that this is, I think it's in The Quietus, you mentioned that it seemed really appealing to go after something really challenging in the bass sax. So I'm wondering what that was like in reality. Like, 'cause I guess there's on one level there's the abstract of something being really exciting, the thought of, having to grapple with this thing, but then the potential frustration of maybe that challenge being all-consuming and maybe too much. Do you remember what that translation was like, from going from that moment of being like, I want a bass sax, to then actually having it and initially grappling with it with these thoughts of like Peter Brotzmann's own interactions in your head?
Yeah, I focused on the baritone for years, probably between the ages of 19 in my later 20s. I think it was when was I 30? Yeah, I think I was 30 when I got the bass saxophone finally. But so I was a baritone player. I played alto and tenor, soprano, and other instruments as well. But Barry was what maybe I played the most, alto and baritone maybe the most. And I fancied myself much more into the low end of things, and I liked the challenge of that. I liked the physicality, the physical demands of the lower end of things. More more air, more power, more metal to deal with. I fancied myself someone that was quite adept, at it, and I felt I had a real affinity for for that end of the spectrum in terms of the instruments. And so I figured bass was going to be this next step. You take a step from alto to tenor, and there are some adjustments to be made, some new demands, but not too much. You take a step from tenor to Barry, and maybe a few more, but not that much. You still just, I have exactly the facility on my and agility and speed and everything on my baritone that I do on my alto. It's just there's still that's still present, and so the physical demands are not in any way extreme, or no, or I did not find them to be. And so when I finally bought the bass, I remember the day it showed up. I was living in this tiny little apartment in Brooklyn, and it showed up, and I brought the box. Like I dragged the box up that's rickety stairwell and into the dark. I can remember every aspect of that place, just dark gray apartment, dingy. And I open up the box, and there's packing peanuts all over the place. And I take the horn out, and I put my mouthpiece on, and I get it strapped on, and then I start playing it, and it was absolutely fucking pathetic. It was just it was miserable. I had like a real moment of crisis, like a true like anxiety moment where I was wondering, it's like, what were you thinking? This is complete nightmare. You suck. This is terrible. I felt like a child, and it was just basics. It was I had no breath support for the massive like bore of that instrument. My fingers trying to, I can still remember how I felt, like it was like trying to palm a basketball, and I was like, I don't like, what this shit. And so it really, it was so daunting. And I remember having shows that week, and all the dudes I was playing with being like, so you got it, you're gonna bring it to the show? And I'm like, oh, easy does it, boys. I'm gonna need a bit. I don't need a bit of time. And I remember after a few weeks, I brought it out to do a solo with this. I had it in the back, and I brought it up, and I soloed on it with this band for one song, and it was not. It didn't go great. It was not forgiving, but it was just this thing, this wake up call to say, you wanted this, right? and now you have it, and make it work. And so then it's just training. It's just sitting with it. It's just getting it to the place. And it doesn't help that my instrument is a very early 1900s, around like 1908, I believe, although it's sketchy in there, the manufacture years, but it's a very early model Con. Wow. It's incredibly unergonomic. It was not. It wasn't really built for human hands. It was just kind of like, this is mostly in the key of what we're telling you it is, and this is how you get it to be this low. And so it naturally is an instrument that is somewhat out of tune. It naturally is an instrument that is not made for hands to really be super agile. It's crunchy, clunky, heavy. It takes an enormous amount of air. But after I've spent 17 years with it now, and it's something now that I will say that of all my instruments now, it is still the least forgiving. That if I don't pick it up for a couple of weeks, wow, and then have to go back to it, I'm certainly not going back to 2005, but it's a building back process where I need to sit with it in a very dedicated way and do particular things so that we are reacquainted physically.
Wow. I mean, I can only imagine that really galvanizes appreciation for what Brotzman was doing prior to you having the instrument. I mean,
oh, absolutely, in every way. Yep.
Yeah. Could you tell me a little bit about what it is with Brotzman that really connects with you? Don't know how easy this is to verbally unpack, but yeah.
The easy thing is, and the obvious thing, I think, is just the sheer force of nature in him, just the power, the ferocity, the at times just kind of like rageful excess of him that I feel like is so on display when he picks up any instrument. He's such a like just a pillar of like strength and of dominance. But the other aspect of it is that he is able to make such beautiful music that is full of longing, full of like very tender, full of introspection. He's able to do that out of what the layman would maybe at first glance hear as noises, hear as completely at times completely unconventional approaches to an instrument. But I heard him in the pantheon of avant-garde improvisation on saxophone. I heard Brotzman as being one of those players who never sounded like they were just doing their shtick, and it wasn't just playful sounds that were really hard to make. It was like it's like that Hendrix thing where he's fully present and he knows what he's saying so intrinsically and inherently. Like it's just watching, listening to his listening to his beating heart and every
Yeah, it's like he's tipping his guts into that instrument.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
The other record you mentioned, well, two more. So, Enya, Shepherd Moons. I'm really intrigued to hear how you first came into this one. I mean, Enya was, for me, I'm sure a lot of people, it was just in my CD cabinet.
Yeah.
From my parents. But how did you come into Enya?
I'm trying to remember how. I'm pretty sure that it was my teacher, Christopher Creviston, though, if he ever listens to this, and he might object. I think that it was him who, when I was 15 and I was studying with him, I think he said, "Oh, do you have you heard this?" And it was Watermark.
Right.
Have you heard this? And I said, no. He's like, well, take it home, listen to it. It's something I just listened to. I'm pretty sure it was Chris. But I just remember kind of, that was, 89 or something, right around then. And I remember what that wave of music felt like then. It felt super new. Like her music, the world that she built was, and I think still is, although it was incredibly unique. It was all hers. She made this thing that didn't exist before, and populated it with stories and creatures and beings, and it was entirely its own, and just beautiful and haunting at times, and soothing, and all the things, and that it is so much. And so I think that maybe she made something that was so impactful that then an entire industry got built up around imitating it, and it created it created out of itself. Well, I mean, the industry created this kind of, this incredibly watered down, tepid version of like a kind of Muzak-y sort of imitation of it in a multitude over many years. And so I think that some people I feel like it's easy to think of her as being part of something that she wasn't. She really did create something that then was capitalized on. But she was an OG. Like, she was an originator of such a I think such a poignant and unique approach to things. And I mean, not that she was the only person doing ambient music at that time, but she definitely made her mark in such a way that I found to be very inspiring and influential at the time, and something that I think I have bonded with more so in later years. It really is the past probably 7-8 years that I can say that, not that I ever had a complete dry period with regard to her music, but it's definitely a renaissance of sorts in terms of how much I listen to, how much I appreciate, how I have a bigger depth of understanding of the mechanics of how she went about doing what she did in the studio, and so again, something like this, I do feel like there are things about breath, and I was talking to somebody recently, because I've been doing a ton of interviews about the menu, about this score that I just did. And so when I give interviews about scores, and there's anything to do with horror, people ask me about making music for horror film and the mechanics of that. And one of the things that I feel like I definitely use is subtle and not so subtle uses, manifestations of breath in that. And if there's one thing that, so our ears, like as the kind of mammal that we are, our ears are keyed up to hear those high frequencies that make up whispers, that make up the crunching of leaves, maybe the swooshing of a branch or something. We have to be keyed up to hear potential danger sneaking, and so for horror, the idea of hearing breathing coming from behind, like just over your shoulder, or hearing the creak of a board, or hearing a crunch of a leaf or something. For horror, utilizing things like that, utilizing that basic evolutionarily instilled trait in us, in the way that we hear and the way we react, that it's there, it's right there for the taking. And same goes for a kind of, there's a flip side to it, because it's also whispering in one's ears softly talking to each other, the sound of wind through trees, the whooshing of that the high end of hearing a wave lap, at the shoreline. So they're there's two ways into there, and so I feel like that she has harnessed a use of exploring multitude of breath and massively overdubbing vocals on over one another with in unisons, so as to but always she's never EQing out that breath, keeping that breath in there, enhancing it with reverbs, getting that so that shimmer is happening and that it's all encompassing, and I think that there's something that really does interact on some fundamental level in our kind of intimacy centers, in like a sensual way, in a sexual way, in a romantic way, in a calming way, and so there's so much of there beyond the fact that I love her counterpoint. I love her melodies. I love like I said earlier, that song Afroventus is maybe the most perfect expression of all of using the kind of whisper tone in conjunction with these big choral counterpoints, and it's just haunting and beautiful and but also some kind of intimate that draws you in, kind of draws me in very, very instantly. So there.
And the last one you picked was Sam Cooke, live at the Harlem Square Club, 1963, released in 1985. This I'm very glad you brought into my life. This is freaking excellent.
I'm excited. I'm very happy that I could introduce. That's awesome.
Really supercharged my toddler as well. The energy is irresistible. So tell me a bit about how did this one come into your life, and what is it about this specific? You mentioned a bit before, but a bit about why this is the one that connects.
I think Matt Bowder, great. He's a great friend of mine who I've known since we were teenagers. He's an amazing sax player and composer, lives in New York. And I'm pretty sure that Matt was the one who brought this to me years ago. I don't remember exactly when. I think it was when I was living in New York, but it could have been even before then. And so what is it about this one? Like I said, I've listened to more Sam Cooke than almost any other. I don't know who would win between like Glenn Gould, Sam Cooke, Enya, and Hendrix maybe. Who would be the one I listened to most in my lifetime, like just by sheer minutes? But it very well could be Sam. So it is just that. There's something about his sense of melody. You can hear it in the early Soul Stirrers recordings, where he came at gospel music. Even when he was a kid, he came at gospel music that had a very particular melodic sense of like phraseology to it that was in the culture of gospel music at the time, and he immediately started to. He put his own signature melodic stamp on it from day one, and only ever sounded like him, and which has always been the thing that I gravitate towards. But there's such a joyousness to so much of what he does. His voice is flawless, and so the the technique of it, the power of it, his range, and I all of that, of course, is undeniable. But then something like this is, like I said, we don't have, or at least I haven't been privy to too many live. I don't know of too many. Only a few live recordings of Sam Cooke, and this one by far is just it's this snapshot of hearing that music, not in the, like, hearing people in the studio is great. Hearing studio versions of a song is great. That's the well manicured. That's the thought out. That's the that the essence is still there. But being able to hear just the raw emotion and the kind of thing, the kinds of ways that we as performers stretch out and push further and harder than, like, in a live context, because you're surrounded by people who are going for it and are all there and feeling the feelings that they're feeling. That's a different music that happens when we're outside of the studio and we're there with people. And so, and this is, you can feel it throughout all of it. There are moments that are just kind of these tiny little subtle things, but like the moment in Chain Gang where the drummer switches to the ride cymbal and just starts this ding 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 ding. Holy shit! I lose my mind every time it happens. Every time I've listened to that record hundreds of times, and every time it happens, if anybody else is in the room with me, I have to go like, did you just see what happened? So it's. And then the beginning, the whole intro to Bring It On Home to Me, where he just breaks down and does a whole a cappella bit, to intro that thing. That's one of the most passionate, like, devastating things that, like, I get choked up just talking about it, thinking about what it's like. It's like ruinously beautiful, and so sincere. And I feel like having someone's human sincerity captured in that way, is like being able to then experience it years and years later through this medium. That's rare, and it is crazy. And so that to me kind of is why this album means so much, is because it is such a time capsule, like of truly preserved human emotion, honesty, and sincerity. That it's entirely undeniable, and so I love it.
Bring it to me. I better leave that alone and bring it on home to me. Yeah, bring it to me. Bring it on home. Bring it on home to me. Bring it on home to me, baby. I need you. I'm kind of lonesome without you. You understand? It's been a long time since you've been in my arms, darling.
Oh, Colin, thank you so much. Like, it's been such a treat to talk about these records and to hear why you like them. Like, it's absolutely the kind of thing that makes me want to dive right back into them. So,
excellent,
appreciated.
Man. Well, thank you, Jack. It's my pleasure. It's really good to talk about music.
And to everyone listening, see you next time. Goodbye.
Okay, bye.